Good morning. It is such a joy to be with you, and I'm sleepy. Both things are true. I am over the moon excited to be here, and I'm sleepy. I'm sleepy because I live on the East Coast, and I have not quite yet fully planted my feet here because I wasn't here long enough. And so I keep waking up extra early in the morning and then getting extra tired in the afternoon. There's somebody who knows of which I speak. And so I come with all of this joy and yet with a little sleepiness. And it is amazing to me that these two things can happen at the same time. And yet I have found that many things happen at the same time. One of those things that I found that happens at the same time is trauma and triumph. Trauma and triumph seem to go together hand in hand. And in fact, trauma and triumph are what gave birth to the church. It was trauma for those disciples. They had all of their hopes and dreams in Jesus of Nazareth, and they believed that the coming of Christ was upon them, and they were going to see liberation in their own time. They were oppressed by leaders who did not care for them, who did not love them, who were not interested or invested in their highest good. They had people who were concerned only with enlarging their own storehouse, concerned only with making themselves bigger and brighter and finding new shiny things to show off to their friends. And they had watched the one who they believed would come and issue a new order, a new way of living. They had watched him murdered, killed by the state, lynched, if you will, a capital death. And not only had they watched him die, but they had watched the very people that he had loved and cared for and celebrated, the people that he had fed, the people that he had allowed to see new life, the people who he had healed, the very people that he had cherished, cheered. And they were traumatized. Wouldn't you be? Fire is like that. It traumatizes us. In the first few moments of fire, it's exciting, it's warm, and you see all of the colors, yellow and orange and red, and you can become mesmerized until it touches something else. And then you can feel a sense of trauma. How far is it going to go? What is going to catch on fire? How much will be lost? Will anyone be hurt? Trauma and triumph gave birth to the church. And the disciples are hiding away. That's how traumatized they were. They went and hid in an upper room. They weren't sure if the crowd was going to come for them. They didn't know just how far the fire was going to go, just how much would be consumed, just how much would be lost, just how much would it cost them to be believers. Have you ever wondered that? Exactly how much is this whole Christian thing going to cost me? How much? What is the cost? Has anybody registered the tally of how much it will be to love my enemies? How much exactly will it cost me to forgive those who have harmed me on purpose? How much will it cost me to turn the other cheek when you've already shown me you were willing to hit me on one? How much will it cost me to put your needs and your wants before mine? Will you just take my gift for granted? How much will it cost me to keep giving when you never say thank you? How much will it cost me to welcome all who come, even though some who come will persecute me for welcoming them? How much will it cost me to make room for one more person to have a seat, only for them to ask for more room so more people can have a seat? How much is it going to cost to get all of those petals out of the carpet? Disciples were hiding because they were traumatized. They weren't somewhere celebrating. They were afraid. And even when Jesus appeared to them, he appeared and convinced them that he was the Christ by showing them his scar. I want you to think about that for a moment. This is the resurrected Jesus, the one we celebrate at Easter, who has triumphed over death, and yet even in the triumph over death, he still has scars. Now, some of us can remember a time in our life when we thought scars were cool. You'd fall and get a bump or a boo-boo, and you would run and show everyone who was, look at my cool scar. And you would show it, and you almost didn't want a Band-Aid on it because you wanted everybody to see it was oozing. And you wanted them to see how cool it was. And then there would come that time in the healing when it would start to itch. And you would be raking at it, and your mom and your dad and your moms and your dads would be like, please don't scratch it. And you were like, but it's so itchy. How do you not scratch it when it's so itchy? And if you really got good in the scratching, sometimes a thing would happen where a part of the scab would come off where the skin was healed, but then you would snatch the part where the skin wasn't healed, because healing doesn't always happen evenly. And Jesus was there, showing them his scars. And I got to admit, I don't know if the resurrected Christ showing me the scars of the crucifixion would have made me excited. I would have wanted a different Jesus. I would have wanted Jesus to come back all glowy and shiny and renewed and prove to me that, yes, when you triumph over death, there are no scars. But there's Jesus, pointing to Jesus' side where Jesus was pierced, and pointing to Jesus' hands where the nails were driven in. And here is Jesus' feet in those cute Jesus sandals we still wear today, and you can see the nail prints there, and that is the proof that it is Jesus. The scars are the proof of who we are. That we have been through something traumatic, and yet we have healed. That we have been through something so big that we can't hide it from other people. A scar is there so everyone knows, yep, that happened. I did fall off the stairs several times. And yes, I did bump my head. And yes, I was trying to show off with my weights. And yes, it did hit me in the mouth. And yes, this little line is there to remind me you probably shouldn't try to make your own gym at home. And yes, my mother still has the scars that prove she gave birth to me and to my brother and to my sister. And there was a time when she looked at those scars and she thought, those kids. But now that she has grandchildren, she looks at those scars and runs her fingers across them with pride and joy, because they have marked that she is a mother And each scar is a testament to our lives. And now I too can trace my finger on the scar and claim one for me. I heard just before I came in that this was not the first fire at this church. I heard that there were two before it. And I asked the gentleman who was telling me the story with such pride and his red tie on, "Were you here for the first fire?" And he said, "No. We were here for the second fire." And I said, "Did the people from the first fire tell you about it?" And he said, "Yes." And I thought, "And you traced your finger along the scar left by that fire? And you learned that this church could heal, would heal, and the scar would ever be there to remind you and us and them of what God had done." And he said very proudly, "You know, we've never missed a Sunday. 3 fires, and we've never missed one Sunday." And he began to count all of the churches and point to them in directions where the church worshiped. But we never missed a Sunday. In the midst of our trauma, there was triumph. The church was born not in the celebration of victory, but in the crucible of trauma, where all are gathered together because the horror of what has happened only allows us to unite one with another. Because the fear draws us close in for protection, and yet in that moment of being traumatized, here comes the Holy Spirit, not in a moment of safety, not in a moment when everything is answered, not in a moment where there is no confusion. The Holy Spirit comes in the midst of trauma. Man, I wish that were different. And yet, this is when triumph shows up, right in the midst sometimes of our very own mourning, right in the middle of our very own fear, right when we are still trying to answer the question. Here is the Holy Spirit, inviting them to look upon the scars that were there. And wouldn't you know it, just when you think maybe the story is going to end with the church being comfortable, there's a plot twist. The disciples do not speak to the crowd in their own language. Can you imagine for a moment what that must have been like for the disciples? I mean, the way they write it in the Bible, it's from the perspective of the listeners, but I want to read the version of one of the apostles as this is happening. "I've already been traumatized. You've made me look at these scars that were pretty gross, and I've gotten over that, and now I'm willing to maybe do something if it's not going to cost me that much. And then I get this warm and fuzzy feeling, and all of a sudden there's this noise, and then I start talking, and I want to tell people about how even though we're in trauma, you are present and you are with us. And I open my mouth, and out comes gobbledygook. And I clear my throat, and I get a drink of water, and I open my mouth again, and out comes bienvenidos." But someone, not an apostle, not a member of a sect, someone else hears these words that I thought were gobbledygook, and they say, "You are speaking in my own language." Have you ever said something that didn't make any sense to you when you said it, but made all the sense in the world to the people who needed to hear it the most? And in that moment, you discover that the triumph is not that you are unblemished. The triumph is not that you have never been scarred. The triumph is not that you were allowed to live in isolation. The triumph is that when we do God's work, we speak not in our language, but in the language of the people. And perhaps we need the trauma. Perhaps we need the scars, perhaps we need the difficulty to be reminded that the story is ours, but the language is the people's. Perhaps we need to be excited and a little sleepy to keep us on our toes. Maybe we need trauma attached to triumph so we don't believe that the story belongs only to us, but that we are the church for the people who are in need. Thanks be to God.